Part 1. The wind howled through the trees, the night air thick with tension. I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the flickering candlelight. It wasn't just the cold that sent chills down my spine, it was the letter in my hands, my husband's will. Ethan had been my life for over 3 decades, my partner in everything, my protector. Or so I thought. But that night, as I held his will in trembling hands, I realized just how little I truly knew him. It started like any other night. A phone call in the middle of dinner, a call I would never have expected. Ethan had been in a car accident. The words felt distant, surreal, as if they were being spoken about someone else. How could this be happening? My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed to the hospital, where I found the cold, lifeless body of the man I had married. In the days that followed, I was forced to face the unthinkable. Grief was a heavy cloak, but nothing could compare to the shock that awaited me when I began sorting through Ethan's belongings. Among the countless old papers and forgotten trinkets, I found something that made my blood run cold, a locked diary hidden in the back of his desk drawer. I had never known Ethan to keep secrets, but the diary was different. My curiosity was unbearable, so I pried it open, and that's when I discovered the truth, his truth. Each page revealed a story I never could have imagined. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, had been living a life of deception. The words I read were filled with love, but not for me. They were for someone else, someone I knew all too well, Lily Green, his widowed sister-in-law. The diary entries spilled out the extent of their relationship, a forbidden love that had bloomed right under my nose, behind closed doors. The betrayal was staggering, each word more painful than the last. My hands trembled as I turned page after page, each revelation cutting deeper into my soul. But it wasn't just Lily that Ethan had been hiding from me. No, the worst part was yet to come. The bombshell dropped when I read about our daughter, Hannah. The girl I had raised and loved as my own. Ethan's diary revealed the chilling truth: she wasn't my daughter at all. She was Ethan's and Lily's child. Our adopted daughter was their flesh and blood, and I had been living a lie for over 20 years. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. How could this be true? How could Ethan, the man I had shared everything with, deceive me like this? The reality of the situation crashed into me like a wave, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game, a woman who had sacrificed everything for a family that wasn't truly mine. But there was more. Much more. Ethan's will, read aloud by his lawyer, revealed something that took my breath away. While I had been raising our adopted daughter, enduring hardships to provide for her medical needs, Ethan had quietly transferred all his assets, everything we had worked for, into secret accounts. I had been left with nothing but a mountain of debt. His betrayal went beyond the emotion. It was financial, calculated, and cold. The anger that bubbled up within me was a force I could not contain. I had given my life to this man, and in return, he had taken everything from me. I had to confront him. I had to make him answer for his actions, but I was too late. Ethan was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by lies. As the lawyer read the last words of the will, something inside me snapped. The rage, the sorrow, and the betrayal mixed into a cocktail of fury I could no longer control. My vision blurred, and the room spun around me. My heart raced as I collapsed to the ground. I could feel my body betray me, my mind spiraling out of control. Hannah, my daughter, stood across the room, her eyes cold and distant. She didn't rush to help me. She didn't even seem to care as I lay there in agony. Her indifference C cut deeper than any physical pain. For 30 minutes, I struggled, my body betraying me, my mind clouded with confusion and despair. Finally, she picked up the phone and called for help. But by then, it was too late. The damage had already been done. My body lay broken, paralyzed, my mind lost in a haze. The world around me became distant, muffled as though I were submerged underwater. I had no strength left to fight. No strength left to scream. And that was just the beginning of my nightmare. Part 2. The world faded in and out, like a blurred painting slowly taking shape. The cold, sterile smell of the hospital room filled my senses as my mind struggled to regain focus. It was as though I had been ripped from one life and dropped into another life I couldn't make sense of. I could barely comprehend the events that had led to this moment. My eyes fluttered open slowly. The harsh, fluorescent lights above the bed burned my retinas, making my head throb. I was lying in a hospital room, hooked up to an IV drip. My limbs felt weak, heavy, as though they belonged to someone else. The sharp, metallic taste of fear and confusion lingered in my mouth. What had happened to me? My body, paralyzed by the sudden collapse, was now regaining some feeling, but everything felt wrong. The world around me didn't make sense. My breath hitched in panic as I struggled to piece together what had occurred. And then, a deep voice cut through the haze in my mind, pulling me from my scattered thoughts. "You're awake," the voice said gently, though there was a coldness beneath the surface. "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" I turned my head slowly, squinting at the figure beside my bed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him, Ethan. The man I had spent 30 years of my life with. The man who had lied to me, betrayed me, and destroyed everything I believed in. He was sitting there, by my side, looking at me with concern. Or so I thought. In his eyes, beneath that facade of worry, I saw something else, something darker, something that made my stomach churn. But I wasn't sure what to make of it yet. Was it regret? Guilt? Or was it something entirely different? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that seeing him there, so alive, so normal, made the events of the past few days feel like a distant nightmare. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, scratchy, as if it had been torn apart from the inside. I tried again, but all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. "What happened?" Ethan's brow furrowed, and his lips parted as if he were about to speak, but then he paused, his gaze lingering on me with something I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, he sighed, the sound deep and weary. "Isn't it obvious?" he said, his voice laced with something I couldn't place. "You insisted on standing in line this morning to buy fried dough sticks. You got knocked unconscious by a motorcycle. That's how you ended up here." I blinked, trying to make sense of his words. Fried dough sticks? A motorcycle? My mind felt foggy, as if the events of the day were being erased before I could fully comprehend them. The absurdity of the situation, the ridiculousness of his explanation, made my head spin even more. Was this what Ethan thought of me? A simpleton who could be knocked unconscious by something as trivial as a motorcycle? I tried to focus, to process what he was saying. It wasn't making sense, though. Why was he sitting there, beside me, acting as if nothing had changed? My body may have been broken, but my mind was sharp, too sharp for his lies to take root. I tried again to speak, forcing my voice to come through. What day is it?" I asked, the words coming out in a rasp. "Why, It's the same day as always, Ethan answered nonchalantly. We were supposed to go to the orphanage today, to finalize the adoption. But now, look at you. He shook his head, clearly exasperated. This is all your fault. The words hit me like a slap to the face. The adoption. It wasn't just about a motorcycle accident. No, it was something deeper. Something far more sinister. In that moment, it all came flooding back to me, the truth I had buried deep in my heart, the truth that I had never wanted to face. The memories of our daughter, Hannah. The girl I had loved as my own. The girl who was really the product of my husband's affair with his widowed sister-in-law, Lily Green. The girl who wasn't even my daughter. The revelation sent a shudder through my body, my chest tightening with grief and betrayal. Ethan, I whispered, my voice shaking. Why did you do it? He sighed, looking down at his hands, his fingers idly tracing the edge of the bed. For a moment, I thought he might offer an explanation, some sort of apology, but the silence between us spoke volumes. Instead of offering me any solace or remorse, Ethan shifted his attention to the 4 bags hanging beside my bed, his voice cold when he spoke again. Once you finish these 4 bags, he said, his tone sharp, I'll handle your discharge. The orphanage is still waiting. We have to go complete the adoption process. He glanced back at me with an expression that I could only describe as impatience. I stared at him in disbelief. Was he serious? How could he act so normal, so detached, after everything that had happened? How could he sit there, as if he hadn't just torn my life apart? No, I said, my voice icy, a chill creeping up my spine. If you want to adopt, go do it yourself. I won't be joining you. Ethan's expression faltered for a brief moment, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the words to respond. He had clearly expected a different reaction from me, one of understanding, perhaps. But instead, he was met with my cold indifference. We both need to be there, he said finally, his voice rising. We can't complete the adoption process without both parents present. I rolled my eyes. The audacity of him, to continue this charade. That's your problem, I snapped. It has nothing to do with me. Ethan froze, clearly taken aback by my response. But instead of pressing the issue further, he fell silent, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. Before he could speak again, the door to the hospital room swung open with a force that made my heart skip a beat. A woman entered, looking every bit the picture of sophistication. She was tall, her long beige trench coat fluttering around her as she walked in, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. My stomach twisted into a knot when I saw her face. It was Lily Green, Ethan's sister-in-law. She was just as beautiful as I remembered, her features delicate, her eyes a little too soft, a little too calculating. And yet, there was something new about her, something different. Her body seemed fuller, her steps more confident, and as I looked at her, I couldn't help but notice the faint sorrow that lingered in her gaze. Ethan jumped up from his chair, his eyes lighting up with an emotion I couldn't quite place. He rushed to greet her, his voice filled with a false warmth. Lily, what are you doing here? He asked, his tone laced with surprise and something else, something I couldn't ignore. I heard that Meline was in an accident, she said, her voice soft but laced with concern. I rushed over during my lunch break at the theater to check on her. Is she all right? Ethan didn't even look at me as he answered. She's fine. The doctor says it's just a mild concussion, but they're keeping her under observation. I watched them both, the scene playing out before me like a twisted performance. Ethan had jumped up to offer Lily a chair, practically catering to her needs, while I lay in the bed, ignored and invisible. Lily's gaze shifted to me, and she said, her voice almost reproachful, "Meline, how could you be so careless? You knew today was the day you were supposed to go to the orphanage to Finn. Alizé the adoption, but you still insisted on going out for breakfast. Now look at you. What about the adoption?" The words sliced through the air, sharp and biting, like a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. As Lily continued to speak, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the betrayal press down on me. I had been a fool. I had been the one to care for them, to support them, to love them, while they had been playing their own games, behind my back. But in that moment, I realized something. Something that filled me with a strange sense of calm. I was no longer that woman. The woman who had been taken advantage of, the woman who had believed in lies. No, I had changed. I had seen the truth, and now I would make them all pay. I wasn't going to let this go. Not anymore. Part 3. The air in the hospital room had thickened, charged with an energy I couldn't quite describe. I watched as Ethan and Lily exchanged a look, one filled with something deeper than mere friendship, something that made my stomach turn. Their eyes locked with a familiarity I could no longer ignore, a connection that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. The facade they had maintained for years was crumbling, and now, I was the one left holding the pieces. It wasn't just the adoption. That hung in the balance, it was my entire life. My trust. My love. All of it had been shattered by the two people standing before me. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as I tried to make sense of everything. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I been so blind to their deceit? How had I spent years of my life caring for their child, raising her as my own, while they secretly watched from the sidelines? The anger boiled within me, rising in intensity with every passing second. Lily's voice broke through my dark thoughts, pulling me back to the present. "Meline, please. You need to rest," she said softly, but her tone had a certain sharpness. "We can still complete the adoption this afternoon. The paperwork will be done quickly." "Just stop," I said coldly, my voice ice as I turned to face her. My eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. "You don't care about me. You never did. This isn't about me, it's about you getting your hands on that child. And you'll do anything to make sure that happens, won't you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but he said nothing. Lily, however, seemed unfazed. She placed the bouquet on the bedside table with an exaggerated flourish, her eyes glinting with an almost predatory gleam. "You're being unreasonable, Meline," she said, her voice sweet, almost syrupy. "We all want what's best for the child. You know that." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "What's best for the child?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "You mean, what's best for you? You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you, Lily? To take everything from me, the life I've built, the daughter I raised, the love I gave. You and Ethan have been playing this game for years, and I was the fool." I could see the faintest hint of guilt flicker in Lily's eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by something darker. Something more calculating. She stepped closer to the bed, her movements slow and deliberate. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice taking on a softer, more sympathetic tone. "You've always been so strong, Meline. You've always managed to get through the hardest of times. Don't you think it's time you let go of this bitterness?" "Let go of the bitterness?" I repeated, the words practically spat from my mouth. "You want me to let go of everything?" You want me to forget about the lies, the deceit, the betrayal? You want me to pretend like I never found out about you and Ethan, pretending that I didn't know about your sick little secret? The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan stood there, frozen, unwilling to meet my eyes. His earlier bravado had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell of the man I once thought I knew. For a moment, everything felt still. Time seemed to stand still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The tension remained, thick and suffocating. I turned to Ethan, my eyes narrowing. You don't get to play the victim here, I said, my voice low and venomous. Not after everything you've done. You've taken my life and turned it into a cruel joke, Ethan. And now, you want me to sit here and act like nothing happened? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked lost, completely and utterly lost. And I couldn't find it in myself to pity him. Not anymore. Lily, sensing that the power was shifting in the room, tried once again to maintain control. She smiled sweetly, but it only made her look more like a predator. Meline, she said softly, I'm sorry you feel this way. But you know what they say, what's done is done. We can't change the past. We can only look toward the future. Look toward the future? I asked, my voice sharp with disbelief. The future? You think you can just waltz in and take everything I've worked for? You think you can just erase everything, like I'm some kind of fool? But it wasn't just about Ethan and Lillian. Amor. No, it was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and everything I had lost. I'm done, I said, my voice suddenly steady. I turned to Ethan, my eyes filled with cold fury. I'm done being your pawn. I'm done being the woman you and Lily manipulated. And I'm done pretending that I didn't know about your affair. You two are nothing but a pair of selfish, manipulative people. I'm not going to be part of your twisted game anymore. The room fell silent. The weight of my words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. He just stood there, staring at me, his face pale and gaunt. Lily, on the other hand, stood a little taller, as if she had regained her sense of control. You're being unreasonable, she said again, her voice no longer as sweet. There was a bite to it now, a coldness that matched mine. You're making a scene over nothing. We're doing what's best for the child. You should be grateful that we're here to help. I clenched my fists, the anger threatening to overtake me. Help? I spat, you're not helping anyone. You're taking everything from me, and you're doing it with a smile on your face. You and Ethan can have each other. But I'm done. I'll find a way to make sure you both regret this. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't need to. I had made up my mind. This marriage, this life, everything I had worked for, was a lie. And I would make sure that the world knew the truth. As I lay back in the bed, the pain in my chest was almost unbearable. But it wasn't just the physical pain. No, it was the pain of betrayal, the pain of realizing that the person I had trusted the most was the one who had hurt me the deepest. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready. I would fight for everything I had lost. And Ethan and Lily? They would soon learn that karma had a way of catching up with people. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time. But for me, time had stopped. The moment I discovered the truth, everything changed. And now, the on. Ly thing I could do was move forward. With or without them. Part 4. The days in the hospital seemed to stretch on forever, each minute feeling like an eternity. I could hear the bustling of the nurses in the hallway, the soft beeping of machines, and the steady murmur of distant voices, but I felt like I was living in a vacuum, detached from the world around me. Ethan's presence in my life had always been constant, even when I wasn't entirely aware of it. But now, in the cold, sterile room, his presence felt suffocating. Like a shadow that loomed over everything I had once held dear. The truth about Hannah being his and Lily's daughter haunted me relentlessly. I had loved her as my own for 20 years. I had given her everything I had, my time, my energy, my love. And now, I realized that I had been nothing more than a vessel for their lie, a convenient cover for their betrayal. My own daughter was the product of an affair I had never known about, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. I had always believed in the purity of motherhood, in the bond that tied me to my child, but now, I was left to wonder if any of it had ever been real. Was it possible to truly love a child when that love was built on a lie? Was it possible to rebuild my life after everything I had known had been shattered into a million pieces? Ethan had promised me the world, and he had taken it all back. He had manipulated me into believing that I was the one who had failed him, the one who had let him down. But now, the truth was clear, I had been the one who had been betrayed. I had been the one who had been left to pick up the pieces of a broken life while he and Lily played their cruel game. The thought of it made me sick. The more I thought about what they had done, the more my anger bubbled to the surface, threatening to explode. And then, as if the universe itself was mocking me, I was discharged from the hospital. Just like that, I was sent back into the world, left to navigate a life that no longer made sense. Ethan had tried to speak to me, to explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more of his excuses. I wasn't interested in being a part of his world anymore. I was done. The moment I stepped out of the hospital, the weight of the world seemed to fall off my shoulders. I was free. Free from Ethan's lies, free from the woman who had once been my sister-in-law, and free from the broken life I had been living for far too long. But the world I was stepping into wasn't the same world I had known before. There was no going back to the life I had once shared with Ethan. There was no going back to the home I had built with him, the future we had planned together. All of that was gone now, replaced by the cold, hard reality of betrayal. I walked out of the hospital, the brisk air hitting my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from dreams of reconciliation or a return to the past. No, it was a different kind of hope, a hope born from the realization that I was no longer a victim. I was no longer the woman who had been manipulated into silence. I was free to build a new life, a life on my own terms, without Ethan, without Lily, and without the weight of their lies. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be times when I would want to give up, times when I would be tempted to go back to the safety of what I had known. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had made a choice. I had chosen to take control of my life, to no longer let the people who had betrayed me dictate my future. And that was exactly what I was going to do. It wasn't long before I started making plans. I couldn't just sit around and wait for something to change. I needed to take action, to create something new for myself. I'd spent too many years giving everything I had to Ethan and his family. It was time to build something for myself, something I could be proud of. The idea of opening a business had always been in the back of my mind, but I had never had the courage to pursue it. There had always been something standing in my way, Ethan's career, his family's expectations, my own fears. But now, those barriers were gone. I was free to pursue whatever I wanted, and the first thing I wanted to do was start over. I spent the next few days in a haze of activity. I canceled everything that tied me to Ethan, his accounts, his businesses, his presence in my life. I sold the house, took the settlement, and used it to secure a few storefronts in the city. I wasn't sure what kind of business I wanted to start, but I had to start something. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I met with contractors, hired staff, and began to turn the storefronts into something resembling a real business. It wasn't glamorous, nothing about my life felt glamorous at the time, but it was mine. And that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. But even as I threw myself into the work, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was still watching me. He had been a part of my life for so long, and now, even in the silence, I could feel his presence. It was as though he were waiting for me to fail, for me to collapse under the weight of everything he had left me with. But I wouldn't. Not this time. I had come too far to turn back now. 2 months later, my business was thriving. The restaurant I had opened was becoming popular, and my reputation was growing. I had built it from the ground up, with nothing but my own hard work and determination. The sense of pride I felt when I walked through the doors of the restaurant was something I hadn't felt in years. It was mine, all mine. But even as I found success in this new chapter of my life, I couldn't escape the feeling that I hadn't heard the last of Ethan. There was something unfinished between us, something unresolved. I had to face him, to make him understand that I wasn't the same woman who had been left broken and abandoned. And then, just as I was starting to settle into this new life, fate had other plans. It was a rainy afternoon when I ran into Ethan again. I wasn't expecting to see him. I hadn't even thought about him in days. But there he was, standing outside the cafe where I had stopped for a quick cup of coffee, holding a small, fragile child in his arms. For a moment, I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was Hannah, or at least, the child who had once been my daughter. She looked so different, pale, fragile, her eyes hollow. I barely recognized her. And then, before I could stop myself, the words left my mouth. "Ethan, what have you done to her?" Part 5. The rain fell in sheets, thick and relentless, washing the streets in a murky gray. My heart raced as I stood frozen in place, my eyes locked on Ethan and the child in his arms. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was as if the world had stopped moving, leaving me suspended in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Ethan's face, so familiar and yet so foreign now, was etched with exhaustion, his eyes hollow and filled with a pain I hadn't expected to see. And then, there was Hannah. Or at least, the child I had once known as my daughter. The child who had torn my world apart with the truth of her origins. She looked so small in his arms, fragile, with wide, fearful eyes that darted between Ethan and me. It was as if everything had come full circle. The story of my life, twisted by lies, betrayal, and heartbreak, was playing out before me once again. I had worked so hard to move on from the past, to build a life of my own, but fate seemed intent on dragging me back in to the mess I had tried to leave behind. Ethan took a hesitant step toward me, his expression softening slightly as if he wasn't sure what to say. He opened his mouth but closed it again quickly as if the words he wanted to speak were caught in his throat. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but I wasn't sure whether it was real or just a byproduct of the mess he had created. After all, how could I trust anything he said after everything that had happened? The silence stretched on, thick with spoken words, until it was finally broken by the soft whimper of Hannah in his arms. She shifted slightly, her little hand reaching out to Ethan for comfort, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the girl. She had no idea what had been done to her, no idea of the games her parents had played behind closed doors. Ethan glanced down at her and then back at me, his voice low and strained. "Meline, I didn't expect to see you here." I scoffed, the bitterness that had been simmering inside me boiling over. "Of course you didn't expect to see me. You've been too busy with your little family to worry about me." He winced at my words, but I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. The man I had once loved was nothing but a stranger now. And Lily, she was just as bad. Together, they had destroyed my life, my family, my trust. And they had done it all in secret, without a second thought for the consequences. Ethan shifted uneasily, as though he were trying to find the right words, but nothing he said would ever undo the damage he had done. "Meline," he began, his voice desperate, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've messed everything up. I've ruined everything. I know it's too late for apologies, but I can't. I can't live with myself anymore." His words hit me like a slap to the face. The audacity, the nerve of him, to stand there and act like he was the victim in all of this. "I never asked for your apologies," I said coldly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside me. "You had everything, Ethan. You had me, you had our life, and you threw it all away for her." I nodded toward Hannah, "and for Lily. You betrayed me, and you've been lying to me for years." I could see the pain in his eyes, but it ly fueled the fire inside me. How dare he look at me like that? How dare he act as though he was the one who had suffered? "You took everything from me," I continued, my voice rising, "and now you want me to feel sorry for you? You want me to forgive you? For what? For ruining my life?" Ethan's face twisted with guilt, but still, he couldn't meet my gaze. Instead, he turned his attention to Hannah, as if she were the only thing that mattered. The child's small hand reached up, her tiny fingers tugging at his shirt, as though trying to comfort him. The sight was heartbreaking. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about Hannah, the innocent child who had been caught in the middle of all their lies. "I don't care. I'll what you expect from me," I said, my voice quieter now. "But I won't be a part of this. I won't be a part of your mess anymore, Ethan. You and Lily can live your lives however you want, but leave me out of it." I turned away from him, my eyes scanning the street ahead, but the weight of the moment hung in the air like a heavy fog. I couldn't just walk away from them, not like this. Not after everything I had been through. As I took a step forward, I heard Ethan's voice, this time more urgent. More desperate. "Meline, please." I froze in place, but I didn't turn back to face him. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you expect me to say? What do you want me to do?" "I want you to understand," he said, his voice trembling. "I want you to understand that I made mistakes. I want you to know that I regret everything. I never meant for any of this to happen." I closed my eyes, biting back the tears that threatened to fall. Regret. What did it matter now? After everything, after all the pain, the lies, and the betrayal, regret was nothing but empty words. Words that meant nothing, because they couldn't change the past. "You should have thought about that before you destroyed everything we had," I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my best efforts to stay composed. There was a long pause, and when I turned around, I saw Ethan standing there, his face pale and filled with a mixture of regret and sorrow. He looked older now, wearier, like a man who had lost everything and was left to wander in search of something he could never find. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. And then, as if on cue, the rain began to fall harder, the world around us blurring into a chaotic mess of water and sound. I turned and walked away from him, away from the past, and toward the future. I didn't know what lay ahead for me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. It was a feeling that was bittersweet, but it was mine. And that was enough. Part 6. The rain kept falling as I walked away from Ethan, my steps quick and deliberate, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if I was truly walking away from everything. From him, from Hannah, from the life I had once known. The rain blurred my vision, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let myself be dragged back into their world again. Not when I had finally found the courage to walk away. As I made my way down the street, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the lies, the years I had wasted believing in a man who had never truly loved me. How had I been so blind? How had I allowed myself to be trapped in a life that wasn't mine to begin with? But I wasn't going to dwell on the past anymore. I couldn't. It wasn't healthy, and it wasn't going to change anything. I had made a choice, and I was sticking to it. I would build my own life. A life that was no longer tethered to the lies of Ethan and Lily. The streetlights flickered above me as I made my way home. The familiar surroundings of the city were almost comforting, but even they felt different now. Everything felt different. As I entered my apartment, I was greeted by the stillness of the space. The silence was a relief, but it was also a reminder of how far I had come. The clutter in the corner, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, it was all a part of the life I was building for myself. And for the first time in years, it felt like home. But I couldn't help but feel a tug of guilt. Hannah's face had stayed with me. I had done everything for her. I had given my heart and soul to that child. She had been my world, and now she was a stranger to me. She had always been a part of the lies that Ethan and Lily had constructed, but she had also been a part of the life I had built. The image of her fragile face, her eyes wide and full of uncertainty, haunted me. Ethan had never truly been there for her. He had abandoned her in every sin. Essay of the word, and now he was scrambling to make amends for the mess he had created. But it was too late. Too much had been done. I couldn't save her anymore. No matter how much I wanted to. As I sat on my couch, I allowed myself to process the emotions that had been bubbling up for so long. The years of sacrifice, the years of feeling like I was nothing more than a shadow in Ethan's life. I had put everything into that marriage. My health, my happiness, my dreams. And what had I gotten in return? Lies. Deceit. And the cold realization that everything I thought I knew about my family had been built on a foundation of sand. My mind wandered back to the moments when everything had first begun to fall apart, the adoption process, the lies Ethan had told me about his infertility, the way he had convinced me that we were doing the right thing by adopting Hannah. The way I had been so proud of our family, so proud of what we had built, only to discover that the very foundation of our life together had been a lie. But it wasn't just Ethan's betrayal that stung. It was my own naivety. How had I not seen it? How had I seen the way he looked at Lily? The way they had both played their roles so well, making me believe that everything was fine, that our family was perfect. But the truth had always been lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally was, it shattered everything I had known. But now, as I sat alone in the silence of my apartment, I realized that I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need Ethan or Lily. I didn't need their approval or their love. I was enough on my own. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, from the rubble they had left behind. My restaurant was thriving, my business was growing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control over my own future. I had learned how to survive without them, and I was determined to keep going. But despite everything, I couldn't help but wonder about Hannah. The girl who had been at the center of all of this. Was she happy? Was she safe? Did she know the truth about her parents? Did she ever wonder why I had disappeared from her life? I couldn't answer those questions. Not yet. But I knew that I had done the right thing by walking away. By letting go of the past. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how I moved forward. And I would move forward, one step at a time. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar sound of my phone ringing. The ringtone sliced through the silence of my apartment, making my heart skip a beat. I picked it up without hesitation, knowing who it was before I even looked at the screen. Ethan. I pressed the phone to my ear, trying to steady my breathing. His voice came through, shaky and hesitant, but unmistakable. "Meline," he said, his tone softer than I had ever heard it. "I know I've hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to ask you something." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to let him pull me back into his web of lies. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. "I need your help," he said, his voice strained. "It's about Hannah. She's not well. I can't do this on my own. I need you to help me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent years pouring my heart into that child, and now, when I had finally let go, he was asking for my help. Asking for my forgiveness. But I wasn't sure I could give it to him. Not yet. Not after everything he had done. "I can't help you, Ethan," I said firmly. "I've done enough. You and Lily are the ones who need to take responsibility for what you've done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, his silence heavy with emotion. "I understand, I said, his voice barely audible. "But I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I've made so many mistakes." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence hang in the air between us, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't need to say anything more. There was nothing left to say. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I hope you and Lily find peace. But I can't be a part of it anymore." And with that, I hung up the phone. It was done. I had said my piece. And now, I was free. But freedom didn't mean that I would ever forget. I had loved Ethan once, but now, that love was buried deep beneath the ashes of everything he had taken from me. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to let go of the people who hurt you. And that was exactly what I had done. Part 7. The sun was setting as I sat in My quiet apartment, the last remnants of daylight slipping through the curtains. I was alone, and the silence felt both suffocating and liberating. It had been months since I last saw Ethan, months since I had confronted him and made the decision to finally leave everything behind. But even now, I couldn't shake the weight of the past. It was always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder of the life I had left behind. As the days passed, I focused on my work, throwing myself in to my business with a determination I hadn't known I had in me. The restaurant was thriving, and my small chain of stores was expanding. I felt like I was finally getting somewhere, finally building something real. But no matter how much I achieved, a part of me remained unfulfilled. It wasn't the work itself. I had learned to love the hustle, the endless hours spent perfecting recipes, managing employees, and planning for the future. The success of my restaurant was my victory, the first real I'd had in years. But there was something missing. Something deep within me that I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the feeling of abandonment, the emotional scar left by the people I had loved and trusted. Ethan's betrayal had been the catalyst, but the damage had been done long before then. It wasn't just about the lies and the secrets. It was about the years I had spent giving everything to people who didn't appreciate it. And in return, I had lost myself. But I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. I had spent enough time wallowing in the past, allowing it to control my every thought and decision. I had spent enough time being the victim. Now, it was time to take control. To own my future. I stood up, my fingers brushing over the keys of my phone. My mind wandered to the things I had once wanted, things I had never allowed myself to pursue because I was too focused on the people around me. The life I had dreamed of before Ethan. Before everything became about sacrifice and duty. It was time to chase those dreams again. I tapped out a message to a long-lost friend, someone who had once shared my passion for cooking, someone who had always encouraged me to follow my heart. "Let's meet tomorrow," I typed, my fingers shaking slightly as I hit send. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement. A spark that told me I was ready to start again. The next day, I met with my friend, Sophia, in a small cafe on the edge of the city. The place was warm and inviting, the soft chatter of patrons filling the air as we sat down by the window. Sophia looked the same as I remembered, her dark hair tied up in a messy bun, her eyes bright with that same curiosity that had always defined her. She greeted me with a smile, and we exchanged pleasantries, but I could sense the unspoken question hanging between us. She knew, of course, about Ethan and Lily. She had been there when I had confided in her about my marriage, my dreams, and the life I had imagined for myself. She had been the one person who had told me that I deserved better. "How are you, Meline?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. "I know it's been a while, but I can see the change in you. You seem different. Stronger, maybe." I smiled faintly, nodding. "I am. It's been a journey, but I'm getting there. I've finally realized that I don't need anyone to define me. I don't need to wait for approval. I can be my own person, and that's enough." Sophia smiled, her eyes glinting with pride. "I'm so glad to hear that. You always had it in you. It was just buried under all that weight. You deserve happiness, Meline. You've earned it." I took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling in my chest. "I know. And I'm finally starting to believe it." We spent the next few hours talking about life, the business, and everything in between. Sophia encouraged me to take risks, to follow my heart and push myself beyond What I thought was possible. She was right. I had spent so many years putting others first, making sure everyone around me was happy, that I had forgotten what it meant to truly follow my own dreams. By the time we parted ways, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a small, almost imperceptible one. It was the first step in reclaiming my life, in moving forward with purpose. The following weeks were a blur of activity. I began taking on new projects, expanding my restaurant, experimenting with new recipes, and making connections with people who shared my vision. The thrill of creating something new, something that was entirely my own, became my obsession. It was hard work, but it was a labor of love, and it felt like the beginning of something real. I also began to spend more time with myself. I started doing things I had long since abandoned, reading, cooking for pleasure, taking long walks in the park, and allowing myself to feel thin. Without the pressure of having to be strong all the time. For so long, I had hidden my emotions, burying them beneath the weight of my responsibilities. But now, I was learning to let them surface. But there were still moments when the past would creep up on me, when I would think of Ethan and Lily, when I would wonder how they were. I had tried to erase them from my life, but they lingered in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had changed everything. One evening, as I was closing the restaurant for the night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. "I saw something today," she wrote. "I think you should know." I felt my heart skip a beat, a mix of dread and curiosity washing over me. I opened the message, and the words that followed sent a chill down my spine. "It's about Ethan. And it's not good." The message was short, but it was enough to send my mind into a frenzy. I hadn't heard from Ethan in months, and I hadn't been looking for him. I had built my life without him, and I had been content with that. But now, the past was knocking at my door again. I didn't know what to expect, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what had happened. The message from Sophia kept replaying in my mind as I sat in the quiet of my restaurant late that evening. The words were simple, but they weighed heavy on my heart. "It's about Ethan. And it's not good." I couldn't understand. After all this time, my past had decided to resurface. I had spent so many months rebuilding, establishing myself again. And now, I was being dragged back into a world I had fought so hard to leave behind. The thoughts of Ethan, his betrayal, the lies with Lily, and the life I had lost, those things still haunted me. But I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. I needed to know what was going on. Despite everything, a part of me still cared about what had become of Ethan. Maybe it was the remnants of a love that had once been real. Maybe it was the compassion for Hannah, for the child who had been caught in the middle of all this. I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't ignore Sophia's message. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. After a few rings, she answered, her voice steady but laced with concern. "Meline," she said, "I didn't want to bring this up, but it seems like things have gone downhill for Ethan. He's in trouble. Big trouble." My heart skipped. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but this wasn't it. "What happened?" I asked, my voice betraying the emotions I had been holding back for so long. She paused before speaking again. "He's been arrested. For embezzling money. From his old job. And, from what I hear, things with Lily have fallen apart too. He's struggling to make ends meet. And Hannah, well, she's not doing well either." I closed my eyes, processing the information. Ethan, the man who had once seemed so in control, the man who had everything, was now broken. His world had crumbled around him, and from the sound of it, there was no one left to help him pick up the pieces. I don't know what to say, I said quietly, my mind swirling with the reality of it all. It's not about saying anything, Meline, Sophia replied. It's about what you choose to do with this. You've come so far. And now, you have a choice to make. I sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Ethan was no longer the man I had known. He had made his choices, just as I had made mine. He had caused irreparable damage, not only to me but to everyone he had come into contact with. His betrayal wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a cycle of selfishness and manipulation that had destroyed everything in its path. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something deep inside me, a sense of pity for him. A sense of pity for Hannah, who had been caught in the crossfire of it all. She deserved better than this. She deserved the truth. But the question was, what was I supposed to do? How could I, after everything, still care enough to intervene? Was there still a place for me in that part of my past? I've made my decision, I said finally, breaking the silence. I can't go back to Ethan. I can't undo the past. But I can still help Hannah. She's my daughter, in every way that matters. I may not have been her biological mother, but I raised her. And I'm not going to let her fall through the cracks, after everything. Sophia's voice softened, and I could hear the pride in her words. I'm proud of you, Meline. You're stronger than you think. The decision was made. I wasn't going to let Ethan's mistakes be the defining factor in my life. I was no longer a victim of his betrayal. I had created a life for myself, one that was mine, and mine alone. But as much as I had to let go of him, I couldn't abandon the child who had once been mine. And that was the turning point, the moment when I realized that, no matter how broken my past had been, there was still a future waiting for me. A future where I could make my own choices, where I could define my own path. In the end, I didn't need Ethan's approval. I didn't need his love. All I needed was the strength to move forward, to let go of the past, and to build a future that was true to myself. The woman I had once been was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned to stand on her own. And that was enough. As I walked away from the shadows of the past, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. My journey wasn't over yet, but I was ready for whatever came next. Because now, I knew who I was, and I was ready to face the future with the confidence and strength that had always been inside me. And as for Ethan and Lily, well, that was their story now. Not mine.